Thanks for the opportunity to share Lilly's journey, what we're calling our PLM QbDVision program. And my colleague Mike is here as well. And Mike's going to go into a little bit more detail of what we're doing there. I'm going to just talk a little bit about our program at a higher level. As myself and Mike were just preparing for this yesterday evening after Doug's inspirational SpaceX journey, we were evaluating, what we were going to talk about, and we said, wait till the audience see what we're doing in Lilly. It'll be nothing compared to what Doug has done. But that was a joke I wanted to start with. But obviously, no one's going to beat Doug here. But at the same time, for us pharma geeks, it's actually, it has been kind of like a really exciting journey over the last couple of years. And there's a couple of folks in the audience that have been partnering with us in this journey as well. And I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the Lilly team who aren't here. There's myself and Mike here. But there's a lot of people within Lilly who've been involved in this journey over the last few years. And truly this is a transformation journey that we've been on. It goes across not just within, like we come from more of the manufacturing tech services background, but also across development, across our supply chain partners as well. So hopefully you find it interesting. So just to start off with, this is, I guess, what we've seen before, we talk about the challenges we have today. We talk about the management of what we call product and process information, product control strategy, it has different names, And when we start in development and we're trying to develop and characterize our process, we're trying to do the initial risk assessments, what's our CQAs, and it's still a relatively small amount of data. It's still a lot of data, but relatively speaking, as we go through the journey of the life cycle of a product, it grows. We go into clinical manufacturing, we go into tech transfer, then we go into commercial manufacturing and the overall supply chain. And then the amount of data and information we need to manage just explodes. And this is, I guess, is what our challenges is today. So the norm here is that we just rely on paper. I know we all know this already, but if you ask yourselves, why are we actually relying on paper today? And there's a level of just comfort, I think. We've all just, it's been the way we've done it for like 50 years, so why would we change? And I think there's a level of, people perceive a level of trust and comfort within that. But in reality, that paper process, is very siloed. Every single department has its own way of managing the same information on paper. So where people perceive we've got trust because I can see the document, I can control it, and it's bounded within a piece of paper, they think that, okay, we've got, we can trust the data itself, but in reality, we're just doing a lot of transcribing, of that data, and as a result, it leads to a lot of data integrity risks. So that's in essence what we're trying to solve here, trying to change people's mindsets of how we might do this. And we've been through a journey in Lilly over the last, I'm going to say the last decade, even before my time on this project, where people have, tried to do this. They know it's the right thing to do to move to more of a digital CMC framework. And we've probably made some progress to some extent, but what we want to share a little bit is the journey we've been on in the last 2 years in terms of how we've made it happen. And probably one of the best ways to explain this is if we just take one of those data elements, and take something that everyone can relate to here, like a CQA specification, and we watch its journey throughout its life cycle, all the way from development when it initially gets, analyzed and proposed, and then gets documented and approved as a CQA, We tech transfer that information. This is just one specification. We tech transfer into our manufacturing documentations, into a local specification document. That in itself then gets transferred and transcribed into a lab information system. That same specification gets used in PV protocols, in CPV reporting, in data monitoring. And every time it's a data integrity check that needs to be performed, And then we go into our dossiers, and our submissions, and then it's getting transcribed into those dossiers as well. And each one of those, country-specific dossiers may have changes to them, and then that results in a loopback. We need to re-update the documents again. We call this the chaos slide. It gets crazier the more I click here. But it's, we go into multiple sites for the same process. Again, you're doing the same thing. We're transferring that information into our data warehouses. And then we get into the overall life cycle of a product. Over like 20 years, we've many different flavors of a process. We've new submissions going on. We've many process changes happening. So that same one piece of information is probably getting transcribed like hundreds, perhaps even thousands of times within one, within its overall life cycle. So, what are we going to do about it? One thing, we in the past, like many people, we said, let's do a POC, let's do a use case, let's show the value. And there is, it's the right thing to do. We've been there. We probably haven't been able to, in the past, maybe get it that last step where it says, right, let's really do this. So when we talk about, enabling transformation, we probably started with a couple of guiding principles behind it all. First of all, very much linked to what Isabel was talking about in the last talk, source of truth. Do we truly believe that we can digitize this information and make it a source of truth? I think there's a lot of people nod their head and say, yes, that's what we need to do. I mean, we talk about it in every single talk here over the summit. But to really make it happen, do we really believe that, that we can do it? And for us, we wanted to set up this guiding principle to make sure that, we always refer back to that. We've had some instances where we've been rolling out, this program, and there is a temptation to say, okay, let's create a digital version of this information, but let's just keep the paper as well because I'm comfortable. And that's going against our overall principle of what we're trying to do. So that was the first one and most important one, and it must be in a digital format, as I say. The other key piece that we want to do is want to make sure that we're not just doing paper and glass. I think Yash talked about it earlier in his speech. We want to be able to manage that information, what we call our product and process definition information, but down at the element level. So every single element, like each specification, each control parameter, has its own kind of life cycle, and we don't manage it at the document level. All the business process and these systems then pull from that digitized source of truth. I mean, every time, when I present this, like people say, this is common sense, and everyone would nod when they see this. But to actually commit to doing that, can have its challenges. But as I said, what we've learned is that we want to, enforce these guiding principles as we go through this journey. And if at all possible, avoid transcription, and sometimes it may be unavoidable, but as best we can, we want to be linking to that source of truth. And most importantly, then, there's no point in actually getting our information, digitizing it, has a nice, cool database or a nice, cool central system, and then over time it just decays over time. So governance is obviously the key piece to this, and that's one of the key principles. And I'm sure Mike will talk about it later when he gets into details of what we've been doing. But trying to govern this information, trying to proceduralize it, making sure that we standardize what we call things. That's going to be key. So this is where we ended up. We had, as I mentioned there a few minutes ago, we had a couple of choices to make. We got a lot of commitment across Lilly that we wanted to have this digital source of truth, of our product and process definition. This is not an exhaustive list, but it covers kind of like the key aspects of what we call our product control strategy that we would want to manage in a central digital system, what we call our product lifecycle management system, partnering with QbDVision. But at the same time, you can actually, decide to, as I mentioned earlier, stick to paper and also do this digital system. And that's sometimes people say that's the first step. Let's just digitize it, but let's keep our paper as well. Let's control it in paper because we're just not ready for the full jump. But going back to our guiding principles, we kind of said that if we do that, we probably will be waiting another 5 years, to be honest, maybe more. So we were very stubborn. We're a stubborn group. And we said, if we're going to do this, we're going to go all the way. And that's what we did. We've made a commitment across our organization, and to be fair to our organization, across all the functions, across quality, across our tech services groups and engineering groups and process manufacturing groups, we said, if we're going to do this, let's do it. And we've successfully been able to migrate our paper-based systems into a digital system and archive our paper process descriptions. And as I said, Mike's going to go through that in a few minutes and just go through that in a lot of detail. So what that does now, we truly do have set up an actual source of truth. And now I won't go through all of the list of elements here, but I'm sure this will resonate with a lot of people. We've now got it here. Now what that's doing is generating lots of conversations, and people really know what's happening. And we can now look at the concept of true knowledge management from development, tech transferring into manufacturing, integrating within our manufacturing systems, even looking at automated batch release, through these systems. And I think that's the shift we're seeing within Lilly. is that once we've done our first one and we've just successfully completed our first product, now people know that it's actually real. And the fear initially of let's just keep the paper as well and going as well as having a digital system, that's gone now. So we've definitely moved the needle. We're still a long way to go in the journey, but yeah, we've more to come. So Mike, I think I'm going to introduce Mike here, and Mike's going to share a little bit of what we've been doing in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah.
So in classic fashion, as the doer, I've been left with little time, so please feel free to follow up with me. Maybe that's a theme we can reflect on as a conference. So let's talk about a use case in executing PLM, right? How do you take your first product digital? I'm going to be talking about a MAB API process, but it's at a level into a level of description that the modality is really kind of agnostic. So the first step is you have a PFD, some process flow document, process description document. Different companies call them different things. And the first step we took is to decompose that, right? So you need the people with the right skill sets to do this, but some of the types of data elements, and this is again back to the theme of contexting at an element level, right, not at a document level. Some of the data elements you might identify out of a PFD are listed there, right? There's usually narrative information, specific nomenclature. Maybe that changes across the organization. Hopefully it doesn't. I think it usually does. You've got parameters that have certain classifications, criticalities, acceptance criteria, and so forth. The list goes on. Yours is different than mine. But you have to start somewhere. So decompose that process definition that you seek to digitize. Then let's move it to QbD. Where do all of these things live in your new digital system, right? So you need people, again, back to the people, that are skilled in the system and skilled in the process. Ideally, you have one of these unicorns we've heard about that can do both, that can help you decompose your PFD and the process of bringing it into the system so that you end up with a structured digital format for your data that you can then do all these wonderful AI-related things that we heard from Yash and others earlier in discussions. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but as Anthony said, that will decay and die if you don't maintain it. And how do you maintain it? As he said, with active governance, right? And so Lilly's kind of trying to take a dual-prong approach with kind of a recognition that PLM is a massive, important digital program to manage critical information. There's got to be some PLM-focused governance with folks that are technically familiar with the content of the PLM system. But there has to be some overarching digital governance because PLM and a digital process or product definition doesn't sit by itself, right? There are tons of other electronic systems that are going to hang off of it or want to use that data, need that data, so on and so forth. And so there needs to be some harmony between what's going on in PLM and what's going on in these other areas of the organization. A key component in how you execute that governance, sadly, needs to be an SOP. That global SOP needs to be given a lot of attention and care and stewardship to make sure that the people using it, which in our case is going to be kind of two groups, right? You have this active, higher level elevated access user, these super users, right? We call them data stewards. They sit in central functions. They're kind of SMEs on a network rather than on a product itself, if you will. And then, of course, you have your broader user base, your folks across the sites that, your frontline reps that need their today document every day, tomorrow QbD system every day. So obviously, we're talking about, in our case, transitioning from a paper-based to digital knowledge management. And I wanted to talk about some key design points and considerations for setting the right data model while you do that. So you have, now I'll broaden it, a selection of documents. We're not just talking about a PFD, because that's not all that governs the process, right? You have some specifications for the product you're making. You have a control strategy. You may have multiple control strategies, depending on how your company slices and dices. Maybe there's a contamination control strategy. It's separate or together from another, so on and so forth. But you have these documents. A given product is made at some number of sites, across some number of networks, usually API, drug product, packaging, something like that. And over a product's life cycle, it accumulates versions, right? As we improve our processes, ultimately there may be a number of changes that we need to refile for, and that's worth it because the productivity gains or whatever new indication necessitate that. So all of this you need to kind of keep in mind as you're doing even your first migration into QbDVision if you want to avoid painful rework in the future, right? And so as you go through these different tabs, that I've organized it by QbDVision's tabs. And these different types of records and the information in them, you need to be really conscious about what is going where. Now, I've been talking a lot about the process. I'm an MSAT tech services guy, but I know a lot of you are probably asking, well, Mike, we've been talking a lot about this digital ecosystem, right? You're a big process guy. Well, you need to make sure you get some unicorn or some cross-functional team in there, because like I said, PLM is not going to sit by itself. Maybe, I know it's S88, not ISA 88. That's not a mistake. It's because I haven't met anybody that fully upholds the standard. It's like a kind of version of it. So this is Mike's Lilly version, S88. Other ongoing digital products, right? All of your end users, existing e-systems, future integration, how active are the products you're talking about? And if you do all of that right, hopefully you can come to a place of common structure and a level of common language that can enable seamless integration in the future. So even if your initial use case might just be for your product and process definition, get your MES folks in the room. Get your automation folks in the room. Find the right ones, because it's important to find the right ones. Have a conversation with them. Say, hey, I call a process step this. You call a process step that. It's actually a process action or a process operation. Can we all come to some sort of agreement that makes sense to everybody so that when you and I are long gone and people want to integrate what we left, it makes sense to them? And so that's kind of the overarching what we want to keep in mind as we go about this journey and how we've taken it kind of from the get-go at Lilly. So thank you.